3 weeks before I was supposed to adopt 2 sisters. My mother looked at me across my kitchen and said, "You can give Maisie a normal childhood, or you can keep proving you can save Ava. You cannot have both." At 12:17 that same night, I found 14-year-old Ava standing in the mudroom with her coat zipped to her chin, an old green canvas backpack on one shoulder, and her house key resting on the bench beside the door. She was not leaving because she hated me. She was leaving because she thought disappearing might save her little sister. "If I'm not here anymore," she said, staring at the floor, "they'll stop trying to take Maisie away from you." I stopped her from walking out. I kept her inside that night, but I did not understand who had planted the idea. What I did not know was that someone inside my own family had spent 6 months teaching Ava to think like that through messages that sounded more like concern than threats. 4 days later, our adoption date disappeared from the court calendar. 10 months earlier, Ava and Maisie had arrived at my townhouse in Columbus, carrying 2 agency bags and one thing that clearly mattered more than everything else: Ava's faded green backpack. Maisie came in first. She was 6, small for her age, with a purple sweatshirt and a rabbit charm clipped to one zipper. She looked at the bowl of apples on my counter and asked whether she was allowed to have one before I had even finished showing them the kitchen. Ava entered behind her. She did not look at the family room or the framed prints on the wall. She looked at the deadbolt, then the stairs, then the door into the garage. "Which way does the school bus come?" she asked. I remember thinking she sounded practical. I understand now that she was mapping exits. Their history fit into a case file much thicker than any childhood should require. Their mother had died. Their father had been absent for years. By the time the girls reached me, the county agency held permanent custody after the juvenile court process had run its course. They had already lived in 2 foster homes. The second placement had nearly split them apart. That family had asked the agency whether they could continue caring for Maisie while Ava was moved somewhere more appropriate for a teenager. They had not meant for Ava to hear. She heard anyway. Nobody had to explain the lesson after that. Maisie was the child people chose. Ava was the complication attached to her. On their first evening, I ordered pizza because I had decided against trying to manufacture some perfect welcome-home dinner. Maisie talked enough for both of them. Ava ate 2 slices, washed her plate without being asked, and carried Maisie's cup to the sink too. When I showed them the bedrooms, Ava asked, "How long is this placement supposed to be?" I said. "There isn't an expiration date written on your door." She gave me a look that was not rude exactly. It was older than rude. "Okay," she said. 3 days later, I opened the mudroom closet, looking for a rain jacket. The green backpack was standing upright against the wall, packed, not hidden under a bed, not emptied into a dresser, not pushed behind winter boots. It was placed beside the back door, close enough for Ava to grab without searching. I stood there with one hand on the closet knob and told myself not to make a thing of it. She needed time. She needed privacy. She needed to decide for herself when the house felt real. So I closed the door and said nothing. I thought silence was kindness. Later, I learned that silence can also give fear enough room to keep explaining the world in its own voice. By the end of the first month, I had learned more about Ava by watching what she did without thinking than by anything she told me. She knew how Maisie wanted her sandwiches cut, diagonally, crusts on. She knew what time the allergy medicine had to be taken, which song could settle Maisie after a nightmare, and which stuffed rabbit had to be tucked under her left arm before bed. At restaurants, Ava always chose the chair with the clearest view of the door. Every evening she asked me, "What time are you working tomorrow?" At first, I thought she was curious. Then I realized she was building contingency plans. She was also 14. That mattered. Ava could be thoughtful and exhausting in the same hour. One Saturday, I washed a black hoodie she had left on the bathroom floor. She came downstairs furious. "Don't touch my stuff without asking," I apologized. She stared at me like apologies were suspicious things. A week later, she skipped a history assignment because she said the teacher already hated her anyway. She argued with that teacher the next day, slammed her bedroom door when I asked what happened, and stayed inside until dinner. When she came out, I told her I was not angry, but I needed honesty. She snapped, "You're not my mom just because you had an empty room." The sentence landed exactly where she meant it to. I went quiet. Then I said, "You're right. A room doesn't make me your mother." I did not add a lecture. I did not remind her how much paperwork I had completed, how many appointments I had rearranged, or how much I wanted this placement to work. Pain did not become proof that she was difficult to love. That was one promise I could keep. The harder thing to notice was how little room Ava left for herself whenever Maisie needed something. One night, Maisie woke screaming from a nightmare. Before I reached the hallway, Ava's door flew open. She was already moving toward her sister's room. I got there first and sat beside Maisie, helping her breathe while she clutched the blanket. Ava stopped in the doorway. "Go back to bed," I told her softly. "I've got her." She did not move. For several seconds, she stood there with both hands hanging uselessly at her sides. It struck me then that taking care of Maisie was not just something Ava did. It was a job she believed nobody else would reliably keep. When I removed that job for one night, she seemed unsure who she was supposed to be. Maisie's fear wore a different face. She was easy, too easy. She thanked me before I finished handing her things. She asked if I needed help clearing the table without being asked. She never complained about dinner. She smiled at adults she had just met, as if friendliness were rent she needed to pay. One afternoon, she knocked a glass of water off the kitchen counter. It hit the tile and shattered. I grabbed the broom. Maisie did not move. Her face went pale. "Am I still good?" she whispered. I stopped. "What do you mean?" Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "If I'm not good, do I have to go?" That was when I finally saw it. Ava survived by keeping one foot near the exit. Maisie survived by making herself pleasant enough that nobody would point her toward it. Different strategies, same fear. After that, I stopped calling Maisie good girl every time she helped. I said, "Thank you for helping," I told her. "You're allowed to be mad." And when she watched my face too carefully, "You don't have to be happy to stay here." With Ava, I stopped expecting gratitude to prove attachment. I never said, "After everything I've done for you." My kitchen had a large whiteboard calendar beside the refrigerator. Maisie drew hearts around birthdays and stars. Beside field trips, Ava wrote only what was happening that week. Never the next month. Never anything far enough away to require believing she would still be here. I noticed. I did not mention it. One night, while I was erasing the previous week, Ava stood beside me and asked, "What if Maisie wants to stay and I don't?" I put the marker down. "Then we talk about what you want. Nobody has to disappear to make the decision for somebody else." Ava looked at the blank squares beyond Sunday. "Adults always say that before they decide," she said. Diane came over for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, carrying 2 gifts that looked fair. For Maisie, she brought a boxed set of illustrated chapter books. For Ava, a $50 gift card to a bookstore. I remember feeling relieved. Maybe I had been bracing for something that was not there. Then Diane walked through the door and showed me the difference between giving two children equal things and seeing them equally. She knelt in front of Maisie so they were eye level. "How's school, sweetheart?" She admired Maisie's braids, asked about her teacher, and praised the way she said thank you. "You are such a polite little thing," my mother said, smiling. Maisie glowed. Then Diane turned to Ava. She did not kneel. She sat across from her with the posture she had used for 30 years as an elementary school principal. "What grades are you getting?" Ava answered. "Any discipline problems at your last school?" Ava's shoulders tightened. "Mom," I said. Diane lifted one hand. "I'm just trying to understand her." Then she asked whether Ava was in therapy and how many placements she had been through before mine. The questions were not cruel on paper. That was what made them harder to challenge. Each one could be defended as concern. Each one told Ava she had arrived as a file before she had arrived as a person. When Maisie showed Diane a drawing from school, my mother kissed the top of her head and said, "There's my easy little sunshine." Ava was standing close enough to hear. She did not look up. A few weeks later, Diane joined us for a family afternoon at the YMCA. Maisie was playing near a craft table when a boy grabbed a bracelet she had made and held it above her head while she protested. Ava crossed the room fast. She took the bracelet back, told him sharply to stop, and when he reached for it again, she caught his wrist for a few seconds. A staff member stepped between them. Nobody was hurt. Ava let go immediately. Because there had been physical contact, the YMCA documented the incident. The note was brief. Ava intervened during a sibling conflict. No injury was reported. Staff separated the children. Ava complied with directions immediately. I read it before we left. Diane had watched the entire thing. 2 days later, Brooke called me. "Mom said Ava put her hands on a younger kid." Technically, that was true. It was also not the truth. I called Diane. "She was protecting Maisie. The staff saw it. There's an incident note." My mother sighed. "Leah, you're doing exactly what professionals warn people about." "What does that mean?" "You're explaining every behavior because of trauma." I felt my jaw tighten. "She grabbed his wrist. She stopped when staff intervened. No one was injured." "I didn't say she was a monster." That sentence bothered me because I had not accused her of saying it. Diane continued in the same calm voice. "Trauma explains behavior. It doesn't erase risk." And there was the problem. Part of the sentence was reasonable. Children with painful histories still needed boundaries. Safety still mattered. That reasonable piece gave everything surrounding it somewhere to hide. After that, the invitations changed. Diane offered to take Maisie to the Children's Museum on Saturday. Just Maisie. Then she found 2 tickets to the Nutcracker and suggested it would be special grandmother time. Later came an invitation for Maisie to sleep over. Each time I gave the same answer. "If it's something for the grandkids, both girls are invited." Diane would smile. "Ava is 14. Leah, you're forcing 2 children at completely different ages to want the same things." I hated how sensible that sounded. Maybe Ava really did not want a children's museum. Maybe I was creating rejection by treating every separate invitation like a threat. That uncertainty was exactly where my mother was strongest. She rarely demanded. She suggested. She rarely accused. She worried. One evening, after Diane left, Dad stayed behind while I loaded the dishwasher. He spoke quietly, as if lowering his voice could lower the stakes. "Your mother will get used to this." I looked at him. She doesn't seem to be trying. "Don't turn everything into a battle, Leah." It was the kind of advice he had given me my entire life. Keep things calm. Give Mom time. Do not make the disagreement bigger than it needs to be. So I listened. I told myself patience was maturity. It was my first mistake, because my clinic sometimes ran late. Diane had already been approved by the agency as one of my backup caregivers. At the beginning, that arrangement felt like a gift. Her name was in the agency records, on the school pickup list, and among the emergency contacts. If a therapy session ran over or I got stuck documenting after closing, Mom could pick up the girls, bring them home, and wait until I arrived. For a while, it worked. Then the YMCA incident happened. After that, Diane did not announce that she was done helping. She simply became unavailable. One afternoon, she had an appointment. The next week, she had a volunteer meeting. Then she was not feeling well. Every excuse was reasonable by itself. Together, they dismantled the system I had built my work schedule around. I traded clinic hours, begged a coworker to cover one evening, and once drove across town with 10 minutes to spare before after-school care closed. When I finally admitted the problem to Tasha, I expected concern about whether I could manage. Instead, she said, "Support system matters, but Diane does not have to be that system." I remember going quiet. Somewhere along the way, I had confused having support with keeping access open to whoever had once provided it. For the first time, I wondered whether Mom's cancellations were inconvenience or message. Without her, maybe I was supposed to discover that 2 children were more than I could handle alone. Tasha helped me begin the approval process for my neighbor, Rosa Alvarez, a retired school bus driver who lived 2 doors down. Rosa did not arrive trying to become family. That was one reason the girls trusted her. The first afternoon she picked them up, Ava opened the passenger door and hesitated. Rosa asked, "You want the front or the back?" That was it. No questions about school. No, "Why are you so quiet?" No attempt to make conversation into proof of gratitude. Maisie climbed into the car and hugged Rosa around the waist before sitting down. Rosa smiled. Ava gave her a small nod instead. Rosa smiled exactly the same way. No performance required. But by the time I started replacing Diane in our support plan, I was already late. She had spent months picking the girls up before I understood that access itself could become leverage. Ava had given her a phone number for ordinary practical reasons. At first, the messages looked harmless. "How did your history test go?" "Hope practice went well." Then the tone shifted so gradually that I might not have noticed it even if I had seen one message in isolation. "Leah looks exhausted lately. You have had to grow up fast. You probably understand things Maisie can't." Sometimes loving younger children means protecting them from adult problems. None of it looked like a threat. That was the danger. Diane did not tell Ava she was unwanted. She gave Ava pieces of information and let a frightened 14-year-old build the conclusion herself. I did not know any of that yet. What I saw was the effect. Ava decided not to join art club after telling me for weeks that she wanted to. The whiteboard calendar stopped carrying even her short-term plans. Her green backpack moved from inside the mudroom closet to the hook nearest the back door, and she started taking over with Maisie again. She checked homework before I could. She packed snacks. She reminded Maisie to brush her teeth even when I was standing 3 feet away. One night, I asked if something was wrong. Ava's face closed. "Stop analyzing me like I'm one of your patients." It hurt more than I expected. Instead of staying curious, I backed away. I told myself I was respecting her boundaries. Really, I was protecting myself from being rejected again. That was my second mistake. A week later, Brooke asked me to meet for coffee. My sister worked in human resources, and she had a talent for making ugly ideas sound responsible. She started with attachment language. Different children had different needs. Love did not always mean keeping everyone under the same roof. Then she said, maybe permanency for Maisie and therapeutic placement for Ava can both be loving outcomes. I stared at her. So separating them is loving now? That's not what I said. It is exactly what you said, with better vocabulary. Brooke stirred her coffee. Mom just wants you to slow the process down long enough to think. I stopped. Slow what process? Brooke's spoon went still. The next morning, I called Dad. I did not ask him whether Mom had always been like this. That question was too easy. I asked about Colleen. I had known my mother had an older sister, but only in the blurry way families sometimes preserve inconvenient people. Growing up, I had heard one sentence whenever her name surfaced. Colleen ran off young. Dad was quiet long enough that I knew the sentence was incomplete. She didn't run, he finally said. When Colleen was 16, she fought constantly with my grandparents. School, curfew, church, everything became an argument. Eventually, they sent her to live with an aunt in Pennsylvania. For the summer? I asked. Dad looked away. No, Colleen never moved home again. Mom had been 13. I waited for the part where Dad explained how watching her sister disappear had wounded Diane. That part was true. It just was not the whole truth. After Colleen left, Mom got the bedroom to herself. My grandparents praised her for being easy, for being sensible, for not making trouble. Dad told me my grandmother used to say, right in front of her, "Why couldn't Colleen be more like you?" The lesson was not only that difficult children could be sent away. The lesson was that the child who stayed could be rewarded for making the removal look reasonable. Mom had learned a family equation before she was old enough to drive. When one person made life too hard, remove that person and call the quiet afterward peace. Dad rubbed both hands over his face. Your mother doesn't think she's being cruel, he said. She thinks this is what responsible adults do when one child is affecting everyone else. I looked at him. And you know she's doing the same thing to Ava? He did not answer. That silence told me more than a denial would have. Then another piece clicked into place. You knew she was talking to Ava privately. Dad sighed. Your mother felt she needed to say her side. To a 14-year-old? Ava isn't a child in the same way Maisie is. There it was, not malice. Something quieter and, in its own way, more dangerous, because Ava could pack lunches, manage medication times, and speak like someone twice her age. The adults around her had started treating that forced maturity as permission to give her adult burdens too. Being capable had become another way to abandon her. A few days later, Maisie had a school recital. Mom attended. Afterward, she handed Maisie a wrapped box containing a bracelet-making kit. Ava got nothing. When I asked why, Mom looked genuinely confused. Ava didn't perform. Technically true again. That evening, the gift sat unopened on our kitchen table. Maisie pushed it away when I asked whether she wanted help opening it. Grandma likes me because I'm easy, right? I froze. Who told you that? She says I make things easy. Maisie picked at the tape on one corner of the box. Then she asked, if I'm not easy anymore, will she like Ava instead? I had spent months worrying that Mom's favoritism was teaching Ava she was unwanted. I had missed what it was teaching Maisie, that love was a ranking, that somebody had to be the easy one, that affection could move to whichever child performed best. The next morning, I called Tasha. By the end of the week, Diane Morgan was removed from the school pickup list, the agency backup caregiver plan, and the girls' emergency contacts. I also told Mom she was not to message either child directly. She came to my house that evening. She did not yell. That would have been easier. "You're punishing me because I said something you didn't want to hear." "No," I said. "I'm changing your access because of how you used it." Her face tightened. "I'm their grandmother." "You are my mother." Neither title gives unlimited access. For the first time, I understood the difference. The girls did not have to earn belonging in my home. Adults could lose access to it. Mom stood very still. Then she asked, almost gently, "You're really going to put a 10-month placement ahead of your own mother?" I wanted to say the answer was obvious. It was not. Childhood had taught me that disagreement with Mom was temporary, but loyalty was permanent. Ava and Maisie had been in my home 10 months. Diane had been in my life 38 years. For a second, those numbers felt like real evidence. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. 3 weeks before the adoption hearing, my family came to my house after Maisie's soccer game. There was no formal dinner, no carefully set table. We had eaten takeout because I had spent the afternoon on a folding chair beside a muddy field. Cartons covered the kitchen counter when Diane said she wanted everyone to talk. "I don't want to fight," she began. Brooke sat beside her, hands wrapped around a paper cup. Dad stared at the edge of the table. Mom looked at me. "Leah, you can love Ava and still admit she may need a more specialized environment." I felt my chest tighten. "Meaning what?" "Meaning Maisie has a chance to forget all of this and have something close to a normal childhood. You are asking that child to carry Ava's history with her forever." "Ava is not Maisie's history," I said. "She is her sister." Diane's expression barely changed. "Then why make one child's future depend on the other child's damage?" Nobody answered. Brooke looked down. Dad kept studying the table. Then a floorboard creaked above us. I looked toward the stairs. Ava was standing there. I could not tell how long she had been listening. She looked at Diane once, then at me, and went back upstairs without saying anything. Mom started explaining. "I told everyone to leave. At 12:17 that night, I heard the mudroom door. Ava stood beneath the weak ceiling light with her coat zipped, the green backpack on her shoulder, and her house key placed neatly on the bench. For 1 second, I saw the first day she had arrived all over again. Same backpack. Same eyes measuring distance. Same readiness to be gone before anybody could tell her to go. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I'll find somewhere else." Her voice was steady. "Maisie stays." I did not move toward her. "Who told you Maisie would be safe if you left?" Ava looked at the door. Nobody had to say it exactly. The sentence frightened me more than if she had named someone. I sat down on the mudroom floor, leaving space between us. For months, I had believed I was protecting Ava because I corrected my mother's words, refused separate invitations, and made new rules whenever Diane crossed another line. But rules had not stopped the message. They had only made me feel less helpless. "I need to tell you something," I said. "I saw my mother making you smaller, piece by piece, and I kept thinking one more rule would fix it. I was wrong." Ava said nothing. "I should have ended her access sooner." That was the apology she deserved, not, "I'm sorry you were hurt," not, "I love you," my failure, named correctly. Ava slid the backpack strap higher on her shoulder. What if the judge thinks she's right? I wanted to promise that no judge would. I wanted to tell her the adoption was certain because certainty was what she needed from me. But I had spent too much of her life watching adults promise things they did not control. "Then I'll tell the truth," I said. "And you get to tell yours too." She finally looked at me. I nodded toward the key on the bench. "You can keep the backpack by the door as long as you need to. I'm not going to make you unpack it tonight. Her face tightened. But keep the key. Ava stared at it. Then she reached down, picked it up, and slipped it into her coat pocket. The backpack stayed packed. That mattered too. Healing was not a girl suddenly believing one conversation could erase years of practice. Sometimes it was only a key going back into a pocket. The next morning, I called Tasha before I could talk myself into making the story smaller. I told her everything. The conversation downstairs, what Ava had overheard, the packed backpack, the key, the fact that a 14-year-old had concluded her sister would be better off if she disappeared. I knew what I was doing. I was putting family instability into an adoption file 3 weeks before finalization. Part of me was terrified that honesty could cost us everything. But hiding it would have meant asking Ava to carry another adult secret so the adults could keep looking stable. Tasha listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Thank you for telling me before someone else told me a version of it." 4 days later, she called again. Her voice was different. "Leah," she said, "a concern was submitted." Tasha did not tell me who had submitted the concern. She did not tell me she believed my mother had written it. She did not even tell me she believed me. What she said was, "I have to treat it like it could be true until the facts say otherwise." I respected that. The complaint did more than call Ava aggressive. It said, I knew Ava had a pattern of physically intimidating Maisie and had minimized the YMCA incident because I wanted the adoption finalized. It suggested I depended too heavily on Ava to supervise her sister and might be hiding instability in the home. That made it serious enough to require review. The agency updated our assessment. Each girl would be interviewed separately. My support plan would be examined again. The YMCA incident would be reviewed. And until the supplemental report was finished, the court continued our finalization hearing. The date did not vanish because someone had won. It vanished because the system was doing what it was supposed to do when a child's safety was questioned. Knowing that did not make it hurt less. Our kitchen whiteboard still had the hearing marked in blue. Maisie had drawn 2 crooked hearts around it and written Family Day underneath in purple marker. When I erased the date, she noticed. "Why are you taking Family Day off?" I stood there holding the eraser and could not find an answer that was both honest and appropriate for a 6-year-old. Before I could speak, Ava reached past me, took the cloth, and wiped the square clean herself. No tears, no questions. Just one blank box where a future had been. That hurt more than crying would have. The interviews happened the following week. Tasha was not alone. Another worker spoke with the girls separately, so nobody could accuse us of shaping their answers. Maisie went first. When she came back, she asked for apple slices and wanted to know whether she could watch cartoons. Later, Tasha told me the important parts. Maisie said Ava yelled sometimes. She said Ava had never hit her. She remembered Ava grabbing her arm once when she tried to run into a parking lot. She also said, with the irritation only a younger sister could manage, that Ava was annoying when she acted like mom. None of it made Ava look perfect. That was exactly why it mattered. Ava's interview was harder. She did not try to become the ideal foster child. "I yell," she said. "Sometimes I grab her arm before I think." Then, after a long pause, "I shouldn't have to be the one keeping her safe all the time." That sentence changed the room. The issue was not that Ava was secretly dangerous. The issue was that she had spent years carrying responsibilities that should have belonged to adults. Even after arriving in my home, she had not fully stopped, and I had not fully noticed how much that burden shaped every interaction between the sisters. Tasha requested the YMCA record. It was not dramatic, no hidden video, No heroic witness appearing at the perfect moment. Just a routine incident note, written by a staff member who had no reason to care about our family argument. It said Ava intervened after a conflict involving her younger sister. It noted brief physical contact, no injury. Staff separated the children. Ava complied immediately. The complaint had not invented the incident. It had stripped away everything around it. That difference mattered. Still, facts could correct a report faster than they could calm a nervous system. One afternoon, I went into Ava's room to leave clean towels on her chair. The green backpack was no longer hanging by the mudroom door. It was on her bed, fuller than before, a sweatshirt, jeans, her charger, a paperback. The zipper was pulled almost completely closed. I did not open it. I did not ask where she thought she was going. I did not move it back to the closet. She was not running that afternoon, but some part of her had returned to readiness. The adults were deciding again, so her body had answered in the language it knew best: pack first, believe later. That evening, after Maisie went upstairs, Ava came into the kitchen while I was sorting mail. She did not sit down. She took her phone from her pocket, placed it on the table between us, and kept her hand beside it for a second. "There's something you should see," she said. "Before they ask me anything again." Ava unlocked the phone and opened an archived message thread. At first, there was nothing in it that looked dangerous. "Hope school was okay. Your sister adores you. Leah works very hard." They were the kinds of messages a grandmother could defend without blinking. Then the tone changed, slowly. Sometimes older kids need more support than one parent can provide. Maisie deserves to stop worrying. You are mature enough to know love sometimes means stepping aside. A therapeutic home isn't rejection. The messages never called Ava bad. They made her responsible for Leah's exhaustion, responsible for Maisie's future, responsible for deciding whether everyone else deserved an easier life. Then came the sentence that made my stomach turn. If the adoption happens, it becomes much harder to fix a mistake. A few weeks later, maybe the kindest thing is to make the choice before adults have to make it for you. Ava watched me read. She never said, "Leave," she said. "Not at first." That was exactly how it worked. My mother had not given Ava an order. She had built a conclusion and let a frightened child believe it was her own. Reading them in sequence changed what each sentence meant. Alone, every message could pass for concern. Together, they formed a corridor with only one direction. Diane kept praising Ava for being mature while using that maturity against her. She never needed to threaten punishment. She only had to convince Ava that staying was selfish and leaving would be proof of love. I kept scrolling. "Why didn't you show me?" Ava looked embarrassed, which somehow hurt more than anger. "Because adults call screenshots drama. I needed to know." I remembered it right. Then she reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out an older phone with a cracked corner. The original thread was still there, not because Ava had been building some brilliant legal case. She kept it because she had spent too many years hearing adults repeat conversations differently after they happened. The old phone was proof to herself before it was proof to anyone else. The next morning, I showed the messages to Tasha with Ava sitting beside me. Tasha read without commenting until she reached one message near the end. "Don't worry about that court date anymore. Adults are finally slowing things down." She checked the timestamp, then she checked something on her laptop. The message had been sent less than an hour after the agency logged the complaint. Ava frowned. "I didn't know what she meant." Tasha nodded. "It matters," she said. "It doesn't prove everything by itself." That distinction mattered too. We were not replacing one assumption with another. The facts still had to hold. Brooke was contacted next. When Tasha asked about the information Diane might have had, Brooke immediately said, "I didn't file anything." Tasha looked at her. "I didn't ask whether you filed it." Brooke stopped talking. Eventually, the truth came out in pieces. Mom had asked her when the YMCA incident happened. Brooke had searched an old family text thread for the date. She had given Mom the name of the YMCA. She had mentioned the adoption hearing date. Brooke insisted she thought Mom only wanted to express a concern. She had never signed a complaint. She had never contacted the agency herself. I listened until she finished. Then I said, "You didn't have to write it to help it happen." Brooke looked down. Dad was harder. He admitted Mom had said, weeks earlier, "Someone has to make the agency slow down." He had heard her. He had not asked what she meant. He told himself she was venting. That was the story he had used for 40 years, whenever knowing more might require him to act. "Dad, every time you decided not to know, Mom got to keep acting with your protection." His face folded. "I never wanted this. Wanting isn't the same as stopping." For once, he had no quiet answer that could make the room comfortable again. That evening, after Tasha left, I sat with Ava at the kitchen table. The phones were between us. I did not tell her what we should do next. I asked, "Do you want these messages included in the supplemental review?" Ava looked toward the hallway where Maisie had left one sneaker in the middle of the floor. Then she looked back at me. "Yes, not destroy Grandma, not make her pay, just yes." "I don't want Maisie growing up thinking this happened because of me," she said. The review ended without the dramatic finding I had imagined during the worst nights. There was no evidence that I had deliberately ignored a safety risk. The YMCA incident had been described without context, not invented. The girls were strongly attached to each other and to me. Ava's parentification was real and needed continued work. My support plan had changed. Diane was no longer an approved caregiver or direct contact. The agency updated its pre-finalization recommendation. The hearing was reset. On the morning of the hearing, Tasha met us outside the courtroom and reviewed what would happen. She reminded Ava that the judge might speak to her directly and that she could take her time. Maisie wore a navy dress she had chosen herself and carried a folded drawing in her pocket. Ava wore black slacks and the same green sweater she had worn to her school conference. She did not bring the backpack. I noticed that immediately and made myself say nothing. Some moments become larger when nobody in room tries to enlarge them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. It was a closed proceeding, not a family spectacle. Brooke was not there. Dad was not sitting in the back row waiting to cry at the right moment. Diane appeared because the communications connected to the review needed to be addressed. The judge already had the file. She did not perform outrage for anyone. "I've reviewed the supplemental assessment and the communications attached to it," she said. Then she asked Diane about 2 messages. Only 2. Diane confirmed the number was hers. She confirmed she had written them. When the judge asked why, my mother answered in the same calm voice she had used in my kitchen. "I believed I was protecting the younger child." The judge looked at her for a moment. "Intent is not the only thing the court considers. Conduct matters." That was all. No lecture, no humiliation, just a sentence. Diane could not edit after it entered the record. Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Morgan, if these extended family relationships continue to destabilize either child, what is your plan?" For months, I had thought the right answer was some version of hope. "We will work through it. Family will adjust. People need time." I did not say any of that. Direct contact will remain restricted unless it is safe and appropriate, I said. The school authorizations have been changed. My backup care has been replaced. Both girls will continue counseling. They will not carry messages between adults. If someone wants access to them, that access depends on their behavior. I took a breath. My children do not have to earn belonging. Adults do have to respect their safety to keep access. The judge nodded once. Then the part that mattered most belonged to Ava. Because of her age, her consent had to be hers. The judge explained that nobody in the room could force her to agree and that she was allowed to ask questions before signing. Ava looked down at the form. Her hands were steady. I used to think saying yes was what you did, so adults wouldn't get upset, she said. She paused. This time I want to say yes because I want to stay. Then she signed. The judge looked at her. Is that your decision? Ava nodded. Yes, no speech, no applause. Just one word that belonged entirely to her. Maisie leaned toward me. Do I have to sign too? The tension broke. The judge smiled. No. Maisie looked relieved. Good. My handwriting is terrible. Even Ava laughed. Then Maisie reached across the space between their chairs and took her sister's hand. After the hearing, I found Diane waiting in the hallway. She did not shout. She did not cry. She only said, "One day you'll understand I was trying to protect the younger one. For the first time, I did not need to convince her that I was right." I understand that you believe that, I said. She looked almost relieved until I finished. And that is why you still cannot be around them. Her face changed. I did not argue. I did not soften it. Belonging was not something my daughters had to negotiate. Access was. 6 months after the adoption, our house was quieter, but not magically healed. Ava checked the front door before bed. She hated last-minute schedule changes. She still argued with me when she thought I was unfair. Once, during a fight about homework, she snapped, "You're not my real." Then she stopped. I did not make her finish. She did not owe me gratitude as proof the adoption had worked. The changes showed up elsewhere. In September, I found her at the kitchen whiteboard with a marker. She wrote, "Ceramics class, Thursdays." Then, "School trip, October." October was more than a month away. I saw it. I said nothing. Maisie changed too. She began saying, "I don't like this." When she disliked dinner, she got angry when she lost board games. Once, when a relative leaned in for a hug, she stepped back and said, "No, I don't want one." I smiled after she left. A child who had survived by pleasing adults was finally safe enough to disappoint them. One evening, Maisie knocked over water. She looked at the puddle. Oops. Then she got a towel. She did not ask if she was still good. Brooke sent an apology that named what she had done. She did not blame everything on Mom. She admitted she had passed along the YMCA information and hearing date. She did not ask to see the girls. 3 months later, I met her for coffee. Just us. If repair happened, it had to begin between adults before either child was asked to participate. Dad changed more slowly. He started calling me instead of carrying messages from Mom. When I said no, he stopped arguing around it. Before Ava's birthday, he asked, "Can I send cards to both girls?" "Yes," I said. "Both." He did. No speech, just 2 envelopes. Mom still told people I had overreacted. She did not lose her house, friends, or place in the community. Her consequence was simpler. She no longer had automatic access to my children. I also met with an attorney. We updated my will, emergency plan, guardian nomination, And authorized contacts? Ava asked. If something happens to you, we don't just get sent back, right? I did not promise what no legal document could guarantee. I put my wishes in writing, I told her. I chose people I trust. I didn't leave that question blank. Paperwork had once meant adults deciding where Ava belonged. Now it was one way, an adult prepared to protect that belonging. That fall, we spent a weekend at a cabin with Mrs. Alvarez. Ava brought the green backpack. Inside were a sweater, book, headphones, and a small block of clay from ceramics. Maisie pointed at it. Your running away bag? Ava shook her head. Weekend bag. That was all. Later, I looked at the kitchen calendar. For the first time, the next 2 months had Ava's handwriting in them. Some children never say, I feel safe. They say it by leaving clothes in drawers, by getting angry and expecting to still be loved afterward, by writing something on next month's calendar and believing they will still be there when the day arrives. Children should not have to become easy to deserve belonging, and blood does not give any adult the right to hurt them while keeping unlimited access. If someone once chose you not because you were easy, but because you were you, tell me what that changed. And if you had to learn that boundaries are not the same as hatred, I would like to hear that too. If stories about family, loyalty, boundaries, and people finding their voice mean something to you, subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.